Hi everyone, and welcome to Eat This TV. My name is Chef Sean. I'm a personal and private chef. I help my clients eat healthier without sacrificing on taste. I throw unforgettable dinner parties that allow you to enjoy restaurant quality food right in the comfort of home. I also help individuals and families with meal prep, setting them up with a week's worth of healthy, from-scratch meals, saving them time. Way better than any meal delivery kits or delivery services. I also do food demonstrations and cooking classes, like the one we're doing here today, that help me share my love and passion for cooking with others. So my journey to becoming a chef is actually a little bit unique in that I spent the first 8 years of my career in the corporate world and working in finance and operations roles, working behind the computer. I realized that that was not my calling. My dream was to be a craftsman, and I believe life is too short not to follow your dreams. And for me, being a craftsman meant working with my hands, delighting guests with deliciously cooked food. So today, we're going to be doing that by diving into a Persian feast, one that highlights and showcases some of the techniques that I learned at culinary school in Paris at Le Cordon Bleu, as well as the rich and varied flavors that I grew up with cooking alongside my mother and grandmother. Hi everyone, I'm Chef Sean, and we're going to start today by making our tart crust. And so here I have some flour and some butter, and it's very important that we keep this cold. So I took this directly out of the fridge, and now we're going to cut it with a pastry cutter. So very important that we don't touch this butter with our hands and melt it. So very similar to when you're making a pie crust or something like that, you want to make sure that you're not melting the butter as you're doing this process. So I'm cutting the butter, and I want to cut it into nice small little pieces. And so that's going to help the tart crust stay nice and tender. All right, so now we're going to add in the other dry ingredients. So this I have almond flour, powdered sugar, and salt. So that's going to go right in. And just going to incorporate that as well. So then once you have your dry ingredients all incorporated, now we're going to add in our eggs. So this is just some whole egg, and I'm going to incorporate that in there. So this flour is actually a flour that's milled in Boston, in Cambridge. I got it from a place that I really love called Elmendorf. They have great flour, great products. Since this is a freshly milled flour, it may take a little bit more liquid than if you're using just your standard kind of all-purpose flour. So this dough is coming together. Once it fully comes together, then we're going to knead it very slightly. We don't want to develop too much gluten here. We're not trying to create a bread or anything like that. We just want a nice dough to come together. And again, I'm not touching it with my hands. I'm going to use my pastry scraper to get that off again because I don't want to melt that butter. And now we're going to turn this into a dough ball. Okay, so I'm just going to go out onto the pan like this. And just turn this into a single cohesive, okay. All right, so now that we have this into a nice dough ball like this, we're going to do a step called fraisage. This is a French term, which essentially just means that you're homogenizing the dough, okay? So just a couple times like that, we're going to turn the dough, and with your palm, just flatten it out. And so this ensures that we have a homogeneous dough that's going to roll out really nicely. So this is now going to go in the fridge, and when we come back, we're going to make our almond cream. All right, so now that we've put our pastry dough in the fridge to rest, we're going to work on our almond cream. So first off with the almond cream, we're going to be creaming together the butter and the sugar. So we just want a nice soft butter, so you can just leave the butter out, leave it out overnight at room temperature to soften. And then we're just going to mix it together with the sugar, which I've done here. So now that we've creamed together the butter and the sugar, we're going to add in our almond flour. We're just going to mix this in here and whisk this together until we get one homogeneous mixture. Now we're going to add in our eggs. And so the eggs are gonna go in here, and we're gonna continue to whisk that. Make sure to get all that in there. All right, and so now this is going to turn it into much more of a liquid mixture. And once that gets going, we're gonna add in our rose water. And so, like I said in our intro, we're infusing this with some Persian flavors. And so this is where the first part of our Persian flavors comes into play here. So I have a little bit of rose water right here. And so this is rose water and just a little splash of vanilla that is gonna perfume this and just give it a really nice smell that's gonna come through, especially as it's baking. You're really gonna smell this come through. So when we come back, we're gonna put this into a piping bag and get ready to move on to the next step. Okay, so now we're gonna put our almond cream into a pastry bag. And so I just have a pastry bag here fit with a small tip. So I'm gonna twist the end of it just to make sure that none of the almond cream comes out before we want it to. And then I just like to roll the bag over my hand, just like that, so that it's nice and easy to just scoop the material into here. All right, so here I have my almond cream. Just go like that. Okay, so now that our tart dough has rested for a little bit, we're gonna roll it out, and we wanna make sure that it's about the size right here of our tart ring, okay? So this is our 20-centimeter tart ring, and we just wanna roll it to roughly about that shape. So I just took it out of the fridge and just smack it down a little bit, because it is a little bit cold. So we're just gonna roll it out until it's roughly that shape. And it always helps to sprinkle just a little bit of flour as you're doing this. It helps things to not stick. All right, so just a little sprinkle, okay? And then we're just gonna roll it out. So I like to roll it out like this, doing kind of quarter turns, or maybe even eighth turns each time, and just rolling it out little by little. You want to roll it out evenly so that it stays in that circular shape. If your dough stops rolling out, it's because you don't have enough flour on the bottom. So if you get to a point where you feel like you're rolling and nothing's happening, make sure you just add a little bit of flour and then flip your dough over. So like I just got to that point right there, so I'm just gonna add a little bit of flour. I'm gonna flip over my dough. So we're almost there. You wanna aim for a thickness of about 2 to 3 millimeters. So it's pretty thin, maybe like 1/8 of an inch, something like that. In culinary school in Paris, everything is done in the metric system. So you might hear me use a lot of the metric terms as we're doing this, and that's just why. It's a little bit easier when it comes to weighing out ingredients and measuring things in millimeters. All right, so you want it to be about 2 finger widths wider than your pastry ring, and that should give you enough extra in order to roll this out. So that's good right there. We're gonna throw this back in the fridge, and then we're gonna move on to the next step, which is our pistachio mousse tart. All right, so now we're gonna be making our pistachio mousse. And to start off, we're gonna make an Italian meringue. And for that, we need to whip up some egg whites. So we're gonna whip up our egg whites just till they start to foam. And I have this nice little hand blender right here, which really helps with this process. If you had to do this by hand, it would take quite a bit of time, and this saves us quite a bit of time. You could obviously do this in a stand mixer as well, but this is a really small quantity, so it doesn't really make sense to use that big equipment when you can just use this little piece right here. We're gonna move on to the syrup. So in order to make an Italian meringue, you have your egg whites right here, and you have your syrup right here. And so this syrup needs to cook to a specific temperature, 250 degrees Fahrenheit. And so for that, I have this little infrared thermometer, which really helps. You can absolutely use a thermometer here and stick it in and see what the temperature is, but this just instantly, you click it right here and it instantly reads what the temperature is going to be. So when we come back, this syrup will be at 250 degrees, and then we're gonna add it into our egg whites to make our Italian meringue. Okay, so now that our syrup is at 250 degrees, we're gonna add it into our meringue as we're stirring. So as you're stirring, slowly incorporate the syrup. And this syrup is gonna cook the egg whites. I'm just gonna get a little bit of this out. Okay, and then we'll get this to the texture that we want. So here we're looking for firm peaks, so stiff peaks. Typically what you're looking for in a meringue here. And I'll show you that texture once we get there. So now that we have the meringue to the right texture, this is it right here. It's firm peaks. You know, we don't need stiff peaks, but this is kind of what we're looking for. It needs to hold on to the whisk as you take it up. Okay. So for our next step, we're gonna whip up the cream, and then we're gonna add in our pistachio paste. All right, so now we're just gonna whip up the cream. Okay, so now that we've whipped up our cream, we wanna get our cream to what I like to call kind of like a yogurt texture. So it's not fully whipped, but you know, it's still very firm. So that's the texture that we have for our meringue, and that's the texture that we have for our cream. And now we're gonna move on to our pistachio paste. And in order for this mousse to set, we need a little bit of gelatin. So I've just heated up a little bit of water right here, and we're gonna add that in. So that's just a little bit of water. And this is just a little bit of gelatin powder that I've already pre-soaked. So a little bit of gelatin powder into that hot water to melt. And we're just gonna let that melt. And once the gelatin has fully dissolved, then we're gonna add in our pistachio paste. So the reason that I didn't put the pistachio paste in with the water to heat up is because I just didn't want to ruin the flavor of that pistachio paste. That's a really delicate ingredient, and if you heat up the flavor, it might change the flavor a little bit, and that's not what we're looking for. We just wanted to heat up the water so that we could melt the gelatin. All right, so now that this gelatin is melted, now we can add in our pistachio paste. And so this is just a pistachio paste that I picked up online. It's a great company. All they do is make pistachios. So they have a really good product. It's a really fine pistachio paste that we're just gonna now mix in our water. And when we come back, we're going to mix all of our separate ingredients into a mousse. All right, so now that I have my meringue, my whipped cream, and my pistachio paste, now we're gonna mix them together. So in order to do this, we have to do it in steps so that it combines nice and evenly. So first things first, we're gonna put in half of the meringue into our pistachio paste. So that's about half right there. And we're gonna lose a little bit of the volume, and that's okay here. You kind of have to sacrifice a little bit of your meringue's volume there in order to make this work. Which is okay. And so this gets a little bit creamier as you start to mix these together. It smells delicious. I wish you were here right now. You could really smell the pistachio coming out. It smells absolutely delicious. And now we're gonna mix that into our cream. So this goes in. Okay, so now that our pistachio paste is in here, we're just gonna mix it together with our cream. And so we wanna do this gently. Put that effort into building up the air in the whipped cream, so we don't want it all to go away, but it is going to go away a little bit. It's okay. We have gelatin in this mixture, so that it'll retain its nice, delicate texture. Okay, so I'm just mixing it gently with the spatula until incorporated. Okay, and then I'm going to add in my last half of my meringue. And I'm just gonna fold that in until it becomes one nice mixture. And there you go. As you can see now, we have a nice, creamy, luxurious mousse. And as this cools down to room temperature, the gelatin will help this set, and we can pipe it into our baked tart. Okay, so now that we've let our tart dough rest, it's nice and cold now, so I can roll it up, and then I'm gonna put it onto my tart ring. All right? So we're just gonna roll this onto our tart ring. And so now we're gonna line our tart dough. So we take it with 2 fingers like that, pinch, and press against the side, okay? So we're just going to do this a little bit at a time, gently going around in a circle as we pinch the dough and press it against the side of the tart ring. Okay? And now that we've done that, we're just going to double check and kind of reseal all the edges, make sure everything's good. And now we just trim off the excess. So we're just going to take any of the excess off of the top with the knife going outwards. And so now that we have this dough, I like to keep it on the side here. I mean, you could reuse this. You know, you could roll out maybe a smaller tart if you wanted. You could absolutely reuse that. I like to keep it here on the side just so we know how it's baking. You know, every oven's different, and so you want to have some sort of visual cue of how you know when it's done. And this is really easy to see. When this is nice and dark, that means this will be cooked. Okay? Okay, great. So now that we have our tart ring lined, now we're going to line it with the pastry cream. So with this pastry cream, I'm just going to pipe it into the middle, and I'm just going to do concentric circles. So it's just going to be one spiral, just like this, to cover the bottom. Okay, and no need for it to be perfect here. It's going to spread out on its own as we bake it. I'm just filling the edges here. Perfect. And now we're going to throw this in the oven, and when we come back, we're going to let it cool and put in our pistachio mousse. Okay, now that our tart is out of the oven and cooled down, now we can put on our pistachio mousse. And you can tell by the color here that this is a real pistachio paste. It doesn't have that crazy, vibrant, neon green color because this is the real stuff. So it's a little bit duller, but that's how you know it's gonna be good flavor. So do the same thing that we did before. We're just gonna pipe this into a circle. And this one, you just try as much as you can to keep that circle going. If you need to readjust the piping bag, go ahead. Okay. All right, so now we're just going to flatten this out with a little pastry brush or a little spatula. And this is where we just be careful. Just want to get it right to the edges, not over. And you can see the gelatin's already set this mousse pretty well. And from a flavor perspective, that's good. So now we're just going to decorate. So this is the part where you can have a little bit of fun. There's no right way to do this. I'm just going to sprinkle some crushed pistachios on top just to highlight the fact that this is indeed a pistachio tart. All right, and we get that nice vibrant green from the real pistachios, not the fake pistachio paste, something you might see in some gelatos that lets you know that it's not the real stuff. This is the real stuff. And finally, we'll just finish with some rose petals. These are dried rose petals, something you can find in your Persian grocer, Middle Eastern grocer. Something I learned in culinary school when you're doing tarts is that you should always have some ingredients on top that let you know what's inside, right? Because obviously you don't know what's inside of this, but when you see the pistachios on top, you see the rose petals on top, you know what you're going to be biting into. So there you have it. We're going to serve this up on the platter, and we'll have this here ready for our Persian feast. Now that we've made our pistachio tart, we're going to move on to our main course, Ghormeh sabzi, one of my absolute favorites. So let's get started. We're going to start off by searing the meat. So right here I have some lamb with the bone in and some lamb, just some stew meat, just cubed up. First off, we're going to sear the meat. So we're going to put some oil, some high smoke point oil, into our pot right here, and this is going to be on, you know, high heat, relatively high heat. All right, so we see that smoke. That means that we know it's warm enough. Test with one. All right, and that sound, that means that we're good to go. So we're going to put the rest of the meat in there, making sure not to overcrowd. Okay, so we'll just do that in a couple batches. We want to make sure that there's room in the pan for everything to brown so it's not boiling in its own juices. A little bit of salt and pepper. A little bit of turmeric. And when we come back, we're going to do another round of braising, and then we're going to throw it in the oven to get that stew started. All right, and so while that is going, we're going to move on to the next step, which is the rice. And so this rice is very special to Persian cuisine, and you're not going to find any rice like this in any other cuisine. And it might be a little bit different than what you're used to of how you cook rice. So what we're going to do here is we're going to parboil the rice, very similar to like you would a pasta. So we're going to get that going. Once it comes up to a boil, we're going to let it boil until the rice becomes just translucent, almost cooked all the way through, but still has a little bit of a crunch to it, almost like cooking an al dente pasta. So once that's done, we're going to strain it and put it back in the pot with some oil, saffron, and turmeric on the bottom so that we can crisp it up and give it that nice golden crispy bottom, which is the signature of Persian cuisine. And for the beans, we're just going to simply cook the beans separately in their own pot and then add them to the stew later. We need to be careful about this part. It's really important that we cook it to that right al dente texture that I was talking about. So I'm going to give it a little stir and make sure that my beans don't boil over here. Okay. So I'm going to give it a quick little stir. I want to make sure that nothing is sticking to the bottom. And I'm just going to take a look at my rice and see where we're at. Okay? Give it a little taste. And so when I chew on it, there's still a little bit of resistance. And that's kind of what I'm looking for. I don't want my rice to be fully cooked at this point. I still want a little bit of that chew. And what I got there was almost done. It needs like one more minute, and then we're going to pull it out and throw it under some cold water to stop the cooking. All right, so now that we've braised the meat, we have all this great fond left over here in the pan, and we don't want to lose that. That's all flavor. So what we're going to do is kind of clean the pan with our onions and garlic. So we'll throw that in, and we're just gonna scrape this around to get as much of that fond off as we can. As you can see, the onions are picking up the color. We're starting to detach a little bit that from the bottom. And this is what's gonna add just some fantastic flavor in our stew. I'm gonna grab this tool right here, which actually helps us scrape a little bit better, so get all that good stuff. Okay. All right, so now we're gonna strain our rice and cool it down with some cold water. All right, so now that our rice is cooled down, we're gonna heat this pan back up and get it to a nice sizzle. So I'm gonna throw some oil, and it's a pretty good amount of oil on the bottom. I want it to be fully covered on the bottom. So I'm not deep frying or anything, but there is a full layer of oil there on the bottom. I'm gonna color it with a little bit of turmeric, as well as a little bit of saffron. And so saffron is a very special Persian ingredient. It's extremely expensive. It's actually more expensive than gold by weight, but it's an extremely delicious flavor, very herbal, very floral. This is saffron actually from Iran that was imported here, and if you could smell it, it's absolutely fantastic. So what you do is you take this and you put it in a little bowl with some ice cubes, and that does a really slow extraction and gets you all the flavor and color of the saffron. And so I'm just gonna put a little splash in there. And obviously we're adding a little bit of water to oil, so it's gonna get a little splash going on, but that's okay. While that's going and heating up, we're gonna put some water into this stew. All right, and that'll be the base of our stew. So with that water, I'm just gonna scrape up those last little bits that are stuck to the bottom. Okay, and remember, that's where all the flavor is, so don't forget that. You don't want it to stick to the pan, you want it to be in your stew. And this is getting hot, but not quite there yet. We want it to be pretty hot, so I'm gonna put my meat into my stew. So I have my boneless here, and I have with the bones here. And so the part with the bones is gonna add a nice, rich, deep flavor to our stew. Okay, careful not to splash anything. And we're just gonna let that simmer now. This can just relax and do its thing for, you know, a good braise will take about an hour, hour and a half, I would say, maybe up to 2 hours. And we're gonna put our rice in here. Now, first things first, let's make sure that we're at the right temperature. So we're just gonna throw a little, yep, and that sizzle, you hear that? That's what we're looking for. So I'm gonna throw a nice little layer down on the bottom. Make sure to fully cover the pan. All right, and so this part is now gonna fry and get nice and crispy for us. We're gonna bring this back up to a boil. And as soon as that's back up to a boil, you can absolutely just leave it on the stovetop. You know, there's nothing wrong with doing a nice little simmer right here. It's easy to access. But if you do want to get it out of the way, a nice way to do that is to take this and put it into a low temperature oven. So if you have a bunch of time, you know, the lower, you know, low and slow, the lower and slower you go, the more flavorful and tender the meat is going to be. If you don't have that much time, you can maybe crank it up to maybe, you know, 350 would probably be like the high end of the range, but 300 is a good braising temperature. I typically like to do about 275 for 2 hours. And so now that the rice has, the bottom part is fried a little bit, we're gonna put the rest of it in. And so the rest of it in, we just wanna gently pile that rice into kind of like a pyramid type shape. We just want a nice mound of rice like that. And then we're gonna create a hole in the center for the steam to escape. Okay, great. Now you can see that our stew has come to a boil, and you can see that there's a little bit of a kind of like a foam or kind of a, you know, impurities that are coming up from the top here. And so we just want to spoon that out. You don't have to do this, right? This is a technique that leads you to a finer, kind of clearer broth. Not 100% necessary, but it does improve the flavor and is a little step that goes a long way. So this is something that I learned in culinary school in Paris, and this is something that they do for all their stocks. They skim off the top all of the impurities, and that leads to really, really clean, rich, flavorful sauces. So there's just a little bit of here, not too much, okay? And our rice is good to go. So I would say about 10 minutes of this part, frying the rice, getting that nice crispy bottom. And based on the smells, I'm thinking that this is ready to go. So you want it to be just on that cusp of just before it starts to burn, right? So you obviously don't want it to be burnt, but you do want it to be crispy. So it does need to get pretty hot. And I think at this point we've reached that stage. So I've just covered this with a clean kitchen towel. You can use paper towels as well, but you know, a nice clean kitchen towel. I'm gonna lower this down to a simmer. So, you know, low heat. That is gonna sit for, I'd say, about half an hour. And when it comes out, it's gonna be beautiful, steaming white rice. This, I'm gonna skim just a little bit more. And you can do this as it goes throughout. You don't only have to do it in the beginning. So this is a really important step in my eyes. Again, not necessary, but it really adds to that, to kind of the finesse of the dish. And when we come back, we're gonna talk about the herbs. Very important part of this dish. Ghormeh sabzi in Farsi is, sabzi means greens. And so that's all these beautiful greens that we have here. We're gonna use the braising liquid here, plus the fried herbs right there, and it's gonna combine and make something truly delicious. Okay, great. And so now that we've skimmed off some of the scum from the top, we're gonna add in our spices. So, you know, this is not something that you necessarily need to do, but it just adds a nice punchy aroma to the lamb. before you add it into the stew. Right here I have some bay leaf, I have some star anise, I have some cardamom pods, I have some allspice, I have some black pepper, and I have some coriander seeds, okay? And that's just gonna add even more flavor to something that's already delicious, but we'll just mix those in there and throw it in the oven. All right, so now that the beans are cooked, we're gonna put in a little bit of salt. So I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I soak these kidney beans overnight. And I like to soak them with a little bit of baking soda because that softens up the skin. And it makes it nice and, no one likes to have a crunchy bean in their stew, so it just softens the skins up nicely. The other thing I do is add salt at the end, because if you add salt, it seasons them up and then they're not gonna get nice and tender. So season with salt at the very end and just let them sit there and absorb that salty liquid. Give that a quick stir. All right, and those beans are good to go. So now that we've finished with our braise, we're gonna move on to the herbs. All right, so this is an extremely important part of the dish. Here I have a bunch of herbs. This is a mixture of parsley, cilantro, and green onion. Now you could use a variety of different herbs. These are the ones that I just had available. Another thing you can do is add a little bit of spinach. So with your herbs here, sometimes you don't have enough herbs. You can always beef it up with a little bit more spinach to get more quantity of what you're looking for. All right, so now that we've food processed our herbs, now we're gonna move on to frying them. So herbs, again, you hear that sizzle, always a good thing. You get all of that in there. All right, so the reason that we're doing this is so that we fry out some of the water, right? So spinach, the herbs, greens in general, they're made up of mostly water. So we want to boil out that water and just concentrate the flavor of the herbs. Like I said, I just put a little oil at the bottom here, and we're just going to fry these up. We want them to get nice and dark green, really, really dark green. And that dark green color is how we're going to know we're done with this step. So as you can see now, it's still very bright. The aromas of the herbs are amazing. But we're just going to keep these frying. Every once in a while, we'll add a little bit more of the oil. Once we get to that dark green, then we're going to stop that. And then we're going to add in the braising liquid that's been braising over there for the past couple of hours. All right, so now that our herbs are fried, you can see that they're nice and dark green. This is exactly what we're looking for. You might even think they look a little black, which is okay. It's not burnt, it's just really dark green. Our stew here, this is braised. This meat is nice and tender. And so what we're gonna do is we're just gonna strain this off. So we're gonna strain off our cooking liquid. Okay, and this is absolutely wonderful. The aromas here are incredible. I wish you could smell this. So the herbs are done. So we're gonna throw that back into our pot. We're gonna add in our liquid. And we probably don't need all of this. But there you go, just enough. Give this a quick stir. Now we're gonna add back our lamb. Now that we have our lamb in here, we're gonna add our special ingredient, and these are our Persian dried limes. They're actually lemons. I'm not exactly sure why they're called limes, but they're these small little lemons. They have a wonderful flavor. Again, like we concentrated the flavor of the herbs, this is a concentrated flavor of lemon. So we'll put probably like 3 of these into this stew and give it a nice aroma of dried Persian limes. Okay, so our dried limes, they just need a little poke from the fork. And you give them a couple pokes. 1, 2, 3. That's about good. And that'll allow the stew to seep inside there. There's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. And so just submerge those, and we'll let this stew down. Probably about 15-20 minutes here, and then we'll come back and finish it off. All right, so now we're gonna throw in our kidney beans. I have a lot more kidney beans than I need here, so I'm just gonna do probably 2 scoops of the kidney beans in there. And then we're gonna finish it off with this spice. This is called fenugreek. And fenugreek is kind of what gives the gourmet sabzi its characteristic aroma. Now it's a very, very pungent spice. It's gonna permeate your house if you cook with this at home, so use it sparingly. I just like to use a little pinch, something like that. That's enough. A lot of people use more, and your house is going to smell like fenugreek for 2 weeks straight. So be sparing with it. It's a very delicious and pungent herb, and that's what's going to finish off our gourmet sabzi. So once that combines with all the rest of the flavors, we're going to be ready to plate and serve. So this is sabzi khordan. This is a greens plate that is typically served alongside any Persian meal. It can feature a wide variety of things, but here we have some fresh herbs, some green onions, some walnuts, radishes, and feta cheese. This can be served alongside bread as a starter, or just as kind of a side dish to have as you're eating the main course. All right, so now it's time to plate. Let's put all this hard work onto the plate and impress our guests. All right, so we have our rice here. Now, with this rice dish, you take the plate, put it on top, and in one swift motion, flip the pot over, and you do a little prayer, and you hope that your rice comes out, and there you go. It's a little broken up, but that's okay. We got our beautiful crispy rice right here that we're gonna be serving alongside our stew. So now that we have our rice, let's serve our stew. So those little Persian dried limes which we had, we're gonna smush them, all right, and get all those juices out there. And then to finish off, we're just gonna do a little fresh lemon juice. Okay, and that really just brings out the nice freshness of that lemon. So now we can put this into our serving platter. You can see that beautiful green color which we've created here. The wonderful aromas. Stacking the meat on top of each other just like that. And we'll finish off with the liquid right over top. Okay. Clean up a little bit of that splatter. So here we go. That's our main course right here. Our gourmet sabzi with Persian rice or tadik, our sabzi khordan to eat on the side. For dessert, we have our beautiful pistachio mousse tart, garnished with crushed pistachios and rose petals. Now let's cut into this one so you can see the inside. So you can see the beautiful layers of the almond cream and the pistachio mousse. This will really impress your guests. Thank you for tuning in to Eat This TV. Again, I'm Chef Sean. I hope you enjoyed this Persian feast just as much as I did. This is just an example of one of the many dishes I can create for you at your own private dinner or cooking class, or even custom meal prep. I'd really love to see you try to recreate these dishes, and if you want to, you can visit me directly at my website where I have the full recipe at chefseanllc.com/Persian feast. Again, that's Chef Sean, SEAN, llc.com/PersianFeast. You can also find me on Instagram at Green Rice and Lamb, and if you do end up making one of these dishes, please tag me. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help. Thanks again for watching. I hope to cook for you again soon.